For a long time, I believed that life shrinks people slowly, the way water wears down stone. I believed becoming small was natural, inevitable, something that happened when years passed quietly and no one stopped to ask who you really were. I did not realize that people help that shrinking along. They encourage it with silence, with lowered expectations, with looks that decide your worth before you ever open your mouth. That was the world I learned to live in, and I lived in it so long that people assumed it was all I had ever known. My life appeared unremarkable to anyone looking from the outside. I lived alone in a modest house that blended into the street, the kind of house people passed every day without noticing. The paint had faded unevenly, the front steps sagged slightly in the middle, and the garden grew only what I planted with my own hands. Nothing about it suggested ambition or success. It suggested survival, and that was enough for most people to draw their conclusions. I kept the house clean and orderly, not to impress anyone, but because routine gave structure to days that might otherwise blur together. There was comfort in repetition, in knowing where everything belonged when so much else felt uncertain. I dressed plainly, always neat, never fashionable. My clothes were chosen for warmth and comfort, not attention. Coats lasted for years, shoes were repaired instead of replaced, and accessories were kept simple. People noticed these things and decided who I was based on them. They always do. They assumed I had settled, that I had accepted less because I could not achieve more. I never corrected them. Silence, I learned, allows people to reveal themselves without interruption. At grocery stores, the assumption surfaced quickly. Clerks spoke to me slowly, carefully, as if too much information might overwhelm me. When the line behind me grew long, impatience became audible. A sigh here, a glance there, the subtle pressure of being made to feel like an inconvenience. When my card paused for a moment before processing, I felt judgment settle instantly, heavy and certain. No one apologized when it went through. They never do. I paid, thanked them, and left, carrying more than groceries with me every time. Restaurants offered a different lesson. Neglect has its own shape and weight. Water glasses remained empty longer than they should have. Orders arrived late or incorrect. Servers avoided eye contact, as if acknowledging me required effort they were unwilling to spend. When the bill came, it was often placed closer to empty space than to my hands, as though responsibility itself were uncertain. I always paid. I always tipped. I never complained. I wanted to see how much respect people offered when they believed there was nothing to gain. Work was where invisibility became most refined. I held a position that kept things running smoothly without drawing attention. I arrived early, completed tasks thoroughly, and solved problems quietly. Meetings happened without me. Decisions were made elsewhere. Ideas I offered returned later, reshaped and credited to someone else. New employees spoke over me easily, mistaking my silence for ignorance. Supervisors expanded my workload when mistakes occurred and narrowed my role when recognition was distributed. They assumed I needed the job because I needed the money. They assumed my modest life reflected limitation. They never asked. What none of them knew was that this life was not my beginning. Long before this quiet routine, there had been another life entirely. My husband and I had built something together from nothing but effort and belief. We worked long hours, took risks others avoided, and learned lessons the hard way. Success came slowly, without spectacle. When we finally sold what we had built, we did so quietly. We invested carefully, choosing stability over display. Wealth, for us, was not an identity. It was a tool that allowed freedom and privacy. When my husband died, grief stripped my world down to essentials. I kept my routines. I kept my home. I kept my silence. People rewrote my story immediately. I became the widow they felt sorry for, the woman they assumed would struggle. Family members softened their voices around me. Advice arrived without invitation. Plans were made on my behalf. They spoke about my future as if it were a problem waiting to be solved. I listened. I want to know what people said when they believed you were powerless. Family gatherings became exercises in patience. Conversations shifted when I entered the room. Financial topics were avoided or simplified. Checks were taken from my hands with polite smiles. Offers of help came wrapped in concern but carried quiet superiority. They assumed fear where there was none, struggle where there was choice. Years passed like this, each one revealing more than the last. Friends drifted away slowly. Invitations stopped arriving. Calls went unanswered. Neighbors nodded politely, but never lingered. Colleagues felt comfortable assigning me extra work without acknowledgement. I became useful, but never respected. And somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling surprised. I began to understand that people treat poverty like guilt and simplicity like failure. Once they believe you have nothing to offer, they feel entitled to dismiss your voice, your time, your humanity. The truth revealed itself during collapse rather than confrontation. The organization I worked for faced sudden financial trouble. Funding disappeared overnight. Panic spread through the office. Voices grew louder. Urgency replaced clarity, and fear disguised itself as leadership. People scrambled to appear indispensable. I listened carefully, hearing plans built on hope rather than reality, promises without foundation. When there was finally nothing left to say, I spoke. I spoke calmly, without drama or urgency. I laid out a path forward based on experience rather than theory. I explained temporary solutions, sustainable adjustments, and long-term stability. I answered questions clearly and corrected mistakes gently. The room changed, not with applause, but with disbelief. For the first time, they looked at me without assumptions. For the first time, they wondered who I had been before they decided who I was. The plan worked. Funding stabilized. Jobs were saved. Programs survived. Suddenly, my presence mattered. Invitations arrived. Opinions were requested. Respect appeared awkwardly, like something borrowed rather than earned. It did not feel like victory. It felt like exposure. The final reckoning came quietly at a family gathering filled with polite conversation. They spoke about money, retirement fears, and uncertainty. Someone mentioned how hard life becomes when you never had much. Sympathy drifted toward me automatically. I spoke calmly, explaining that my life had always been intentional, that I had never needed saving. What hurt was not the assumption, but the behavior that followed it. Silence filled the room. Apologies came quickly, layered with explanations meant to soften guilt. Some relationships did not survive that truth. Others changed permanently. A few became honest for the first time. I still live simply. I still dress modestly. I still move quietly through the world. But I no longer mistake invisibility for humility, because I learned something invaluable. When people believe you have nothing, they show you exactly who they are. And once you see that clearly, once the illusion falls away, you realize the truth. You were never poor. You were simply surrounded by people who measured worth the wrong way.